Hi everyone, welcome to Anatomy Fitness podcast number 3. Today we're going to talk about optimal training program. Hi guys, today we're talking about optimal training program. My guest is Ross Gilmour, highly experienced coach, someone who I highly appreciate, and someone who can actually share a couple of secrets on optimal training program for us. Hi Ross.
Hey Ivan.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Ross is based in Dubai for the last, I think, 8 years.
It's approaching 9 now.
Wow, 9 years. Wow. Ross has a big experience working with Gen Pop. He is doing obviously a lot of the hypertrophy programs, fat loss programs, highly experienced coach who is obviously consistently working on his education and ideal person to talk about program design and optimal training program. Ross, what is for you optimal training program?
There's a wide barrel question, isn't it? So I think, I guess first of all, just to give people a bit of background, my experience in the last 9 years or so has been quite mixed, quite varied, probably more so than many people might realise. Everything from general population training to post-rehabilitation to sports performance. Obviously, I had a heavy period in my mid-career going through competitive CrossFit, and I think most people in Dubai probably recognise me more for that, like being a CrossFit athlete and competing in CrossFit and potentially coaching it. But the truth of the matter is, actually, I've spent pretty much the majority of my career, even from the start, working mostly with clients on body composition. Now, of course, this is not what it was necessarily known as much as a decade ago. People were just generally talking about fat loss, muscle gain, bulking, cutting, etc. Sure. Body composition as a term has certainly became a bit more recognised now, and almost people are calling themselves body composition coaches or specialists. And I guess I would almost label myself, in the words of Christian Thibodeau, as a bit more of a generalist. But I guess nowadays, especially with the Better Body Collective and where our business is going, focusing a lot more on body composition, primarily speaking. So if someone asks me what is the optimal training program, it's that answer that no one loves to hear, but it always has to be followed up with a bit of context. It depends. If I was working with a powerlifter, that's obviously going to vary hugely from, Gen Pop Susie Muffin Top versus, maybe someone who's a very advanced lifter or looking to do a photo shoot or step on stage. So it depends. I think, generally speaking, the principles remain the same. The methods just vary depending on the individual and the context and where they're at. I think if you could give me a bit more specifics, I'd probably be able to dive off of that a bit more.
Sure. Let's say if we focus strictly on general population, someone who is, let's say, typical normal person who is trying to lose fat, who is quite inactive, who has very poor mobility, someone who doesn't know much about nutrition, typical guy who is sitting for 9-10 hours a day, So how would you design optimal training program for that person?
Cool. That's a fantastic way to start, because I think that's also in reality the majority of who most coaches are working with, unless you are someone who's kind of working with professional sports teams, or whether you're working predominantly with, like, say, physique athletes. I think, let's be honest, the majority of us are definitely working with the Gen Pop. So I think actually the answer starts outside of the training. I think before we can even design a training program, we need to really understand that individual and all of the different circumstances and stresses that are currently existing in our life. And before even looking at nutrition, although nutrition is often a key one, we look at the current lifestyle, what's their profession, how much time do they spend sitting down at a desk all day or not, how much time are they exposed to potentially stressful situations, are they a senior partner in their firm, or are they further down the chain, how much responsibility do they have, how much travel do they have on their plate, are they constantly getting on planes all the time, all of these sort of things, really, that has to be kind of tied in first. And then, of course, psychologically, how resilient are they to stress? That's something that's often underplayed. And I think as a society, we are becoming more and more blasé, so to speak, about the effects of stress. Even though we have more information than we've ever had about stress, I think we're getting to such a point where it's like, oh, well, you know, I'm not that bad, or I'm not that stressed, and, you know, I'm doing okay, I'm handling everything. But the reality is that majority of people are not handling everything okay. There's many things that are coming at an expense to progressing in your career, to having that family, to owning those nice things. And unfortunately, it often tends to come at the expense of health. And so most general population coming into a gym, you know, they think, well, if I come in, I start training 5 days a week, I do double sessions, cardio every day, all that sort of stuff, then, you know, it's just all about doing as much as possible to get to that end result. But unfortunately, we're just, as far as human beings, as organisms go, we are only as good as the ability to adapt and recover from stressors, and we often don't take enough time in the beginning to take stock of exactly where is my body with regards to its overall stress. So there's the term we know is allostatic load, and all that allostatic load is, the best way I've heard it described by Luke Lehman of the Muscle Nerds, was it's essentially you know, distress that can be from obviously environment, external factors to yourself, and then there's eustress, which is
relationship, the
stressors you create on yourself, you know, whether that be self-imposed by training. It's obviously a big stressor. Often people don't realise that, but training is a huge stressor. Being in caloric deficits for extended period of times is hugely stressful. And then just our general, how we choose to handle certain situations can be, again, a huge additional stressor. How resilient are we to things people say, things people do? How well do we let go of factors outside of our control? Or do we tend to worry about things we shouldn't really be worrying about? All of this stuff kind of plays into that pool of us as an individual, as a stressed or de-stressed organism at times. And so I suppose to take that on a step is we know that there's two states within the body that we predominantly operate in. So you have essentially what's called your parasympathetic state and your sympathetic state. And what that's kind of, I suppose, if you branch that together as one term, we refer to that as our autonomic nervous system. And if I were to make a pretty bold claim, I would actually say that autonomic nervous system management and mitochondrial health is probably going to be two of the things that we're probably going to see the biggest focus on in the fitness industry, at least from an educational standpoint, over the next 5 years. Because I think as research emerges on the importance of those two areas, we're starting to understand just how vital those are. So how does that relate to, you know, Pete from the law firm, or Susie Muffintop from the, you know, doing our PA job? People are in a far worse place starting off, coming into a gym environment, working with a trainer, going to group exercise classes than they probably think. And so I think the optimal training program is going to generally start off with minimum effective dose, so getting the most out of the least. That can only really be answered with collecting a good amount of data on someone when they first start off. Obviously, if someone's doing it on their own, they're not going to put themselves through an onboarding questionnaire to a coaching plan, or they're not going to really think about all of these things generally before going into an exercise program. But actually taking the time before you embark on that sort of journey, and actually taking note of, like, well, where am I currently? Let's take almost a bit of stock of my life, take a stock of life admin, take a stock of what are all the things that I've got going, how much sleep do I currently get is a huge one that's constantly, it's funny, we are the only organism on the planet that will purposely forgo sleep to achieve other things. Literally the only organism. Every other animal on the planet, it's a non-negotiable, they get their sleep, because it's so essential to how we function and operate. So essentially, to answer your question, that the first part of it is actually not completely training related at all, because if we don't have the sufficient environment to create an effective training response, then we need to make sure that that's all in place first. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't exercise, right? Because people say, oh, well, I'll just not go to the gym then. That's obviously not the answer, right? So we want to get to a point where, right, what's the minimum effective amount that we can do to achieve an effective stimulus? Sure. And so the optimal training program will, for me, get the most from the least. How that might look for most people, certainly for a lot of the clients that come to us, they want to dive into something like a physique transformation. And that certainly is achievable even for general pop starting off. However, I would say that most people probably need to go through it's often been kind of termed now as prepping the prep. This is what we would refer to for competition guys, but if we're looking at that in the general pop, it just essentially means, are they in a physiological and psychological place where they can actually handle the rigors of a fat loss phase? And most people, to be honest, are not there.
Already. Wow.
Most people are in a place where they're just not going to be able to handle that additional stress of resistance training and a calorie deficit, and potentially the cardio that they do. Although with that said, I do think this is one of my things that I've changed a lot myself over the years. I think if you'd asked me 3-4 years back how much cardio I was prescribing to clients, it would have been extremely minimal, and I think that's increased a hell of a lot. Again, just with understanding things like mitochondrial density and understanding the importance of getting people really good at utilising both their fat oxidative pathway, which essentially just means utilising fats for energy, and then utilising the glycolytic pathway. And if you think about it, most people are very, very poor at creating energy.
Yeah.
And then we're asking them to come in and do really heavily glycolytically demanding activities such as resistance training, HIIT training, all that sort of stuff, when in reality they're not really in a great place to do that just yet. So I think taking all of that into account, just a really basic training program for most people, for me, would look like 3 full body sessions a week. It would be, 2 to 3 working sets of an exercise for maybe 4 to 6 exercises in a session. Yeah. And I have some clients that they go through 4 exercises in a session and they are done. If they do 2 or 3 working sets and they do it really accurately with really solid intent, they haven't got much more juice in the tank, because what you've actually exposed is, well, this is you working really accurately and efficiently, and you've not actually got, this is all the resources you have right now. But imagine if I'd have just chucked them into like a 8 exercise, 3-4 sets each exercise workout, and just constantly digging a deeper hole that they can just never really recover or get out from. So I think, what does an optimal training program look like? Well, for the Gen Pop coming in, it's going to be getting the most from the least. It's going to ideally cover all the main movement patterns that we want people to go through. And I know it's very popular at this day and age now to kind of, the biomechanics thing has become very, very, very popular now. Guys like my coaches, for example, the muscle mentors, Coach Cassim from M1 Education, the hypertrophy coach. There's another, maybe Ben Pekulski could be another name, but there's a bunch of guys now that have really popularized the importance of biomechanics, and to good reason. It's probably one of the most underappreciated areas of delivering exercises in a gym. And I think it's ideally probably the next step for most coaches after the level 3 to kind of get more clued up on this. But the problem is that we're now getting to a stage where, because people are starting to understand it to such a greater degree, it's kind of trying to create the perfect exercise profile, try to align the moon and the stars to get this absolutely perfect exercise, locking things down, creating as much stability as possible. And that's okay, if you're trying to drive a high amount of force production in a particular area, but the reality is, for most Gen Pop clients, they haven't learned how to create stability on their own yet. And so machines have a place, free weights have a place, but ideally it's a combination of many movement patterns that explores their kind of full, I guess the term that I've heard used before is movement map. We want to try and map and lay down as many movement patterns for as full a range, or as full an active range of motion as they currently have available, so that we're creating enough resilience for them to actually handle all the things we're going to throw at them in a training program. So I think it's becoming trendy now, because we see all of these guys who are working with prep athletes and everything else, and they're doing all these really fancy exercise variations with this profile that drops off here and everything else. But the thing is, for most Gen Pop, they're just so far away from doing any of that stuff at this point in time. We just need to get into the basics, encourage as much range as we can, encourage as much ownership and stability through both free weight movements and machines and cables. So I think it's just exposing them to not every exercise under the sun, kind of finding your pool after you've done hopefully a very thorough assessment initially, and really working that pool, really, really being patient for maybe 12 weeks, 16 weeks, not rotating tons and tons of exercises, just really getting them nailed down to, can you execute these super, super, super well, recover from the stress that we're imposing on your body, and then when you're in a position where you're ready, we can start to make the tweaks and modifications and then start taking it honestly.
Great. So basically, what kind of assessment you would do for Gen Pop population if they're coming to you? Let's say, Jim Johnson come to you, he's not moving much. So what assessment are you doing for them to find out more about them?
Perfect. So usually, whether it's Jim or Susie, they're usually in a pretty bad place, most of them, when they come to us, right? Because what do most of our Gen Pop clients do? They're spending a lot of time sitting down, right? Yeah. And depending on what their exercise history is, either they've been exposed to some form of exercise, or they've, how often have you had some clients like, I've never exercised, I didn't exercise since my teens, my 20s, and it's 20 years later. So it's actually changed quite a bit over time. We kind of discussed off air that, I spent a bit of time in a clinic called Emirates Integra, and it was quite interesting getting some of the kind of referral post-rehabilitation for different spine cases, knees, shoulders, and I think if you'd asked maybe 20, 30 years ago, there'd be a lot of back-related focus. But it's funny now, even like kids in their 20s and things like that, there's a plethora of issues, neck, especially with the current iPhone and, the way technology has progressed. Neck, spine, shoulder. I mean, to be honest, there's just so many. Yes, the spine and the back gets a lot of attention because it's the most sensitive. But it was after seeing all of these things, I went through a phase of doing a lot of localized assessments where I'd kind of like, right, I want to understand someone's shoulder flexion overhead, and I want to understand, you know, someone's hip internal rotation and And then as time went on, as I started kind of putting what was practical and what was optimal together, I started realizing, well, actually, looking at people just training, just moving as they're intended to move with multiple joints moving at the same time, that can actually tell you a hell of a lot. As long as you've got a keen eye and you know what you're looking for, that can tell you a hell of a lot about what you're seeing in front of you. And so I used to do a bit more of a local to global approach, and I've literally switched that probably in the last 3 years. I now do much more of a, listen, I'm going to take you through the movement patterns that I intend to train you in.
Sure.
And I'm going to see what is exposed there, because if I take you enough fatigue in an exercise, I'm going to see what's going to break down, if it's not already breaking down from phase one. And I think that's a key point as well, to be honest. Amazing. Is that if you are taking someone through an exercise and they've not even reached fatigue and things are not working properly, why on earth are we then going to take someone to failure at that point in time if they haven't even learned how to do it with a minimal amount of fatigue? And that's probably quite an important variable to manage. So I would want to see what's their tolerance without fatigue, what's their tolerance with fatigue, because sometimes people can be nailing it when they're no fatigue, but you get
compensation.
As soon as they get like 3 reps, 4 reps from failure, it's just things are going crazy. So, nowadays, the short answer to your question is I like to see them train, and then if I see anything that's really glaring, like say they squat and knees are diving in, or feet are starting to turn massively out, what do I need to maybe go and explore? It might be that if they're squatting and their feet are turning right out, I have a pretty good idea that they're going to lack hip internal rotation. So then I'll maybe get them on the floor and I'll look at hip internal rotation, or I might look at them and do a dumbbell shoulder press, for example, and it's seated. And then I might say, right, okay, well, I noticed that your hand is diving forward ahead of your elbow. Chances are you probably don't have very good serratus strength or stability. You probably don't have sufficient external rotation in your shoulder. Maybe your posterior delts are really jammed up because you spend a lot of time in a really lengthened position. They never ever get short, so how can you expect them to be back there? So it's very much changed over time. It's very much a global, let's see you train, and then I'll start looking at pinpointing things as I go. The way we work at the Better Body Collective is we do 2 initial movement assessments sessions before we even design a training program, because we want to see all of these things. Well, what's your ownership? What's your current active range of motion? What's your current capacity for fatigue, and so on and so forth. And then from there, we can make a bit more of an educated decision on, right, this is how we might program for this individual.
Great. What are the biggest mistakes when it comes to program design?
I know why you're smiling when you say this. I think, to be honest, the biggest one nowadays would just be program hopping. Now, the term program hopping won't mean much to the general population, but most coaches will know it fairly well. It's just that changing training programs often, and I think there's two reasons why that tends to happen. The main one being is that coaches fear that clients will get bored of performing the same training program for a long period of time. They think, well, this person's not going to keep paying me month upon month or every 12 pack or whatever way they run their business. They're not going to keep paying me if I just take them through the same sessions for 12 weeks. My counter to that is that if you change training, I'll give an example. Say you've got a squat, hinge, push, pull in a training program, and you have that in for 4 weeks. The reality is that most people within those first 2 to 4 weeks are just acquiring the skill. They're going through essentially a phase of skill acquisition where they're actually learning how to perform that bloody movement. They haven't even got to a point where they can even load it up or create a really effective stimulus yet. So you then take that out, and now they have to relearn a whole new skill all over again. For me, that doesn't seem very efficient as far as getting progress. And so I think trying to set that expectation with clients early on, like when we sit down in the initial consultations, we are very thorough with that in terms of here's how we deliver a service, here's how we tend to deliver training, here's how we tend to deliver nutrition. And I think if there's one thing that, new trainers or even trainers that they've kind of lost their way a little bit, or they're struggling to get clients to buy into what it is they do, I think the better and the more clear you can be with your expectations and how the process works from the start, you avoid a lot of that fear of not providing enough variety or not providing enough, novelty to their training. So I think, the biggest mistake would be changing the program way too often.
Way too often. Wow. Great. What's your opinion about group exercise?
I think exercise, period, all of it has its place. I think like with every form of exercise, whether it's personal training, TRX classes, Les Mills, CrossFit, whatever it is, it's always going to come down to how well is it delivered and how well is it managed and supervised. Of course, the reality is in a group exercise class, you're not going to be able to go into the nitty-gritty of people's form and technique, because quite simply 1 or 2 instructors to 30 people, it's just not physically possible.
Sure.
I think it's funny, it's kind of almost a bit backwards, in my opinion. What I mean by that is that most people who are attending group exercise classes should ideally be with a trainer learning how to train first. The people who actually would benefit the most in the group environment are actually people who already know how to move their bodies and know how to train.
Wow, that's a great tip.
But it's literally the opposite of what's happening in gyms at the moment. Most people are going in and they've got... So the thing I always say to people is, and I don't know if you found this as a coach, I mean, listen, you've been doing this as long as me, if not longer, right?
Yeah.
I don't think people lack motivation or willpower, not as much as they think they do. People often say, what's the number one reason why you can't stick to a plan? Oh, it's just I lose motivation, I lose willpower. And I'll take this from a good friend of mine, the head coach of M10 in Nottingham in England, Dan Smith. People have a lack of clarity of vision. That's their main problem. Because if they don't have a clarity of what it is they're going to achieve from attending week in, week out, or going to the gym, how can they expect to have an outcome that's favourable? Because nothing's been planned, nothing's been mapped out in advance. So they're just kind of going, and I'll be really blunt. Most people are just going to the gym to feel tired when they leave.
Sure. And
they think, well, if I feel tired and I'm sweating buckets when I leave, then that's all that matters. But it's like, well, you can do that, but you're not necessarily creating an effective training response.
Stimulus or
and listen, if you're just trying to maintain, or you don't have a particular goal, if you're just trying to go and essentially have fun, keep moving, I think like it's important to first of all separate exercising and training, because training is something that has a particular goal for a particular period of time with a desired outcome. Exercising is moving your body generally in many different ways in order to stay fit and healthy and active. Both have their place. But the problem is most people want the outcome that a training program provides, but they want to go and exercise randomly and feel tired.
But they don't know for better. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because, if I look your style, the way how you teach your clients, the way how you train, and you see other people around in the gym, there is a massive difference. And you can see that even people who are fairly fit, fairly lean, and they think they know their stuff, they could achieve a much better result in the shorter period of time if they understand what they're doing. Yeah. So that's for me.
Can I make a bold statement?
Yeah.
I would quite confidently say that 95% of people, trainers included, walking through the front doors of a gym every day don't really know how to train properly.
That's
and I know people might look and think, well, who the hell are you to say that? Well, it's just my observation. It's just what I've seen.
That's
you look at how people move, you look at how people act, and how they kind of manage themselves when they're in the gym environment. Is most people are not intellectually involved in what they're doing. Most people are, it's just a distraction. It's an escapism from all of the other things they're facing in their life, but there's no real intent behind what it is they're doing. It's like, well, if I go here, I sweat a little, get a little tired, feel a little sore, then that's enough, right?
Work,
and the weekend doesn't matter. I can just go to brunches every weekend and
smash myself.
But I just can't understand why I'm not getting results, and that's unfortunately the main rhetoric we seem to get from a lot of people. But the amazing thing is that when they do decide to get really intellectually involved, they decide to get really immersed in the process of, right, I really want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing and get the most return on I'll speak in business terms. I want to get a high ROI for my efforts. And if there's one message I get across to people is that, listen, group exercise has a place. I have a bunch of clients that they might do 3 times a week with me, but they might attend like a spinning class, or they might go to a group class once or twice a week to get some cardiovascular work in, and that's perfectly fine, but that's been discussed and it's been planned, and it's
part of the program.
How does this fit as part of the program? So I hate when you get a lot of personal trainers just completely crush, like, oh, group exercise is rubbish and this is rubbish. Like, everything has a place. It's just what's the context, and does it fit that person? They
don't know how to explain it properly. That's the key thing. Yeah. What I want to ask you, how you track your clients' progression?
Just generally speaking, overall.
Just general.
So our systems at the moment, we have everything running off Google Sheets.
Okay.
So what we do is that once we've set a client up, they essentially have their own weekly tracker. They have a nutrition tracker. They also have essentially a weekly check-in tracker, and that kind of it can be as granular as we need it to be, or it can be as simple as we need it to be. So it can pretty much cover everything from their weight, steps, calories. It can track things like sleep, and if they've got the technology like an Oura Ring or a Whip Strap or whatever, we can get them to track things like HRV, deep sleep, REM sleep. Of course, this is potentially going more granular than what most people can tolerate. Now, if I'm working with, I'm very fortunate to work with a few coaches. I can get them to go in a bit deeper on this stuff because they want to understand this stuff and how it interacts and how that affects everything that they're doing. Again, it all comes back to that autonomic nervous system and how well do you regulate that. But for general population, it might just be the key things we need to know and maybe 3 to 5 real key data points that are specific to them. For a lot of people, it's generally going to be based around digestion and sleep.
Okay.
And their perceived what sort of stressors they may be experiencing that week. If we can get a pretty good handle on those things, along with their nutrition, habits, and of course if they're nailing their training, which of course if they're with us in person, we're going to try and make sure they're going to do that. If they're a remote client, we would use things like video form checks. We get them to send videos to us and we do form checks and give feedback, but also potentially videos to explain, well, you're doing this, watch this video and look how this is different. And so and then as far as monitoring clients over a longer term, they have their nutrition tracker, they have their training program. If they're working with us in person, we kind of take care of that. But if they're required to do other sessions over and above the personal training sessions, clients have access to anything that we've got access to, they have access to. So we give them full access to their own sheets. They could go in and say, for example, I trained them on the Sunday, and on a Thursday, like, well, I want to go back and see what I did on the Sunday. There'd be no problem for them to go in and see what they did. They've got access to everything at any time. And then the weekly check-in sheets, what we do is we review the data on that on a weekly basis. And essentially we get on a what's called Loom. So essentially it's like a Google Chrome add-on. And we record the screen as we're discussing through their feedback. So, hey, here was how your nutrition went. Here's how your training went. Here were the lifestyle factors. Here were your wins this week. Here were your challenges. And the thing is, we actually leave a space in the check-in form for the client to communicate with us. We let them tell us. Like, we don't say, this is what happened. Like, tell us, what were your challenges? What were your wins? What were the struggles you were facing? What are all the things that you maybe feel is relevant for me to know so that I can help you best? They'll usually relay that back. And then once we have all the data and their subjective feedback, we can then provide a really comprehensive weekly check-in video to them. After that weekly check-in video, we then allow a period of a couple of days for them to come back to us with further questions. And then it's a case of just take what I've asked you to do and go and action it.
Wow.
Which is the number one reason why people aren't getting the results they want, is because they might have all the information. Because let's be honest, we live in an age where you can pretty much find everything. But why do people then still not get the results? Well, they don't take action. They don't know what to do or how to implement that information. So one of I think our key roles as coaches or online coaches is how effectively can you get someone to take action?
Wow, that's a great tip. Tell me, please, for you, in your opinion, most underrated exercise and most overrated exercise, like generally speaking?
Oof. It's a bloody brilliant question. I think rather than looking at exercise, I think I'll go into kind of a bracket of exercises.
Sure.
So I think people are often looking for, okay, machines versus free weights. And I think the thing is people often underutilize how valuable machines can be to the general population, and teaching them how to stabilize, lock down, how to really focus and not necessarily isolate a muscle. I prefer to use the term target what they're after, because we know isolation is technically single joint, compound is multi-joint, right? So if I want someone, for example, a squat is an example. A lot of people want to do squats because it's sexy, it's cool. You see all the CrossFitters doing it, but the reality is not everyone's really built, say, to do a Chinese style squat. So if you're programming a squat that's meant to target someone's quads, but they're not built for that structurally, you're just trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. So for example, I think using things like a hack squat in that example, I think a hack squat is probably one of the best machines in the gym for driving quad and leg output, because you can get someone locked down, nice and stable.
Stabilize pelvis.
You can teach them how to get everything in place, and then I want you to work just this muscle, and you can really, really coach that in a very stable and safe environment. I've often found that most clients, if they've went through a period of doing that sort of stuff, like say a hack squat or a leg press, when they actually go back towards doing squatting, they actually are better at squatting, because the brain's kind of like, well, I feel a bit safer going through this pattern.
Ross, thank you so much for today. This was brilliant. I hope I'm going to see you more often here. We have a lot of things to cover together.
I'd love to. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
We've all been there. Hours searching the internet, asking friend upon friend, making call after call, trying to find the right fitness professional, health specialist, or sports coach. So much time, energy, and even money spent only to find more problems than solutions. Well, now, with the Find Fit People platform, you can find all the available professionals with the skills you need in an instant. We've removed all the barriers by establishing a community of many different skilled